Fate Zero is one of my favorite anime of all time. The Fate premise of mages summoning ancient heroes to fight to the death for the Holy Grail is just ingenious, no matter what the story does with it. A lot of other Fate anime are really exciting and entertaining, and I really enjoy them, but Zero shines far above the rest. It's not just cool and action-packed, as all Fate shows are. It has so much more to it that makes it truly one of a kind. It's gorgeous, obviously. Ufotable did a great job. Music in anime is very important to me, and Yuki Kajiura's score just elevates it to another level. It can be so mind-blowingly epic or so heartbreakingly beautiful and tragic, and it's all brought together by the motive that runs through many of the tracks. The openings and endings are really good too. Fate Zero excels from a production standpoint, but most of what I adore so much about the story is, well, the story. There are a couple really great videos about why Fate Zero is, in structure, a classical tragedy, and I agree with that conclusion. Not only do lots of sad, terrible things happen, they happen to tragic heroes, possessed by ideals, coveting a divine power and realizing all too late that they were misguided and doomed from the start. In a way, Fate Zero isn't just one story, but several overlapping ones, and to really understand the greatness of the series, you have to look at all the characters whose tragic stories are being told. Kiritsugu is the closest thing to a protagonist that Fate Zero has, and of all the characters, he's the one who could be most aptly described as a tragic hero. Kiritsugu isn't emotionless, and it's important to understand this. He may be outwardly cold, but he is in great pain, even as he does what he believes is right. He has absolute faith in his ideals, that his end goal, the salvation of humanity, will make all the killing he has done not be in vain. He has to believe in this miracle, the Holy Grail, for without that perceived guarantee he would likely be driven insane. He's lost the people he cares about so many times. First Shirley, then Natalia, then Maya, and Irisville. There's something so profoundly tragic about Kiritsugu's character. He's worked his whole life and killed so many people, all in faith that the Grail will bring an end to human conflict, only to find at the end that the Grail cannot even grant his wish. In doing so would bring about the deaths of even more people. And then to add even more salt to the wound, Kiritsugu attempts to destroy the Grail, only for that to bring about more destruction. This man is so incredibly sad, so incredibly tired, so incredibly flawed. He's just an astoundingly written character. Saber, like Kiritsugu, is complicated and tragic and misguided. Her chivalrous ideals and notions of kingship are constantly torn apart by the other characters. But while her ideology is flawed, it has some merit, and none of the other characters are wholly right in their ideas either. That's one of the great things about Fate Zero, the way it presents all these conflicting, flawed outlooks and lets the audience judge for themselves who is in the right and wrong. In particular, the conflict between Saber's values and Kiritsugu's is so brilliantly crafted. So many of the master-servant pairings are so perfect with characters so similar or so different, and I can't help but be in awe of how clever and well-constructed this story is. Saber and Kiritsugu conflict because they are so different in their ideals, yet they are two sides of the same coin, both ending the story in misery because of those ideals. One of my favorite scenes in the entire show, the debate in the wake of Lancer's brutal end, exemplifies this perfectly. Saber is disgusted by Kiritsugu's methods, and Kiritsugu is disgusted by the way that she is able to romanticize war, as if there's any just way to kill someone. Not only is this one of my favorite scenes ever, it has one of my favorite quotes as well. "You heard her, Irie. Our heroic spirit over there considers a battlefield to be better than hell." What a joke. A battlefield is hell itself. There's no hope to be had on one. There's nothing but unspeakable despair. Just a soulless crime we call victory, paid for by the pain of the defeated. Just What a line. But, while we're on the topic of chivalry, let's talk about Lancer, shall we? Lancer is an amazing character. The way that the events of the Holy Grail War parallel his legend is just a stroke of genius. One thing that really gets me about Lancer is how, compared to a lot of the other characters, he wasn't even asking for much, but he was just in the wrong story. All he wanted was to fight an honorable battle and be loyal to his master, but in this story, knightly honor has no meaning. Saber and Lancer may wish for a fair fight, but their masters have absolutely no intention of that. Lancer tries to maintain utmost loyalty to Cainith, but Cainith sucks and has nothing but disdain for his servant. Diarmuid really shouldn't have had faith in him in the first place, but his code of honor will not allow him to disrespect his lord, even though his master has no respect for him. And try as he might to avoid repeating the past, but his love spot gets him in trouble again, as Cainith's betrothed Silaui falls in love with him, which causes Cainith to further disdain him, which is the exact same thing that happened with Fionn and Granier, and in both cases it ends with Diarmuid's lord leaving him for dead. Also, earlier in the show, Lancer spares Kiritsugu because he's Saber's master, and doing so would go against his code of honor, and then it's Kiritsugu who's responsible for Lancer's death, and he doesn't care about his honor, and if Lancer had just killed him there, he wouldn't have died that way, but he couldn't because of his honor, and God, this show is just so brilliantly constructed. Also, with Lancer's death comes his cursing of the Grail and its wish, and guess what happens? And, as the title of the episode states, the end of honor in the show. Diarmuid, like so many of the other characters, is possessed by ideals that ultimately lead to their downfall. Kariya. Oh, Kariya. Even more than the other characters, it's so clear that he's doomed from the start. His entire plan to win the Grail to save Sakura has so many holes in it. There's no guarantee that his body will even last for that long, and he has to actually defeat all the other servants, which is no easy feat. And even if he does get the Grail, it entirely depends on Zoken actually holding up his end of the deal, which Kariya should know better than anyone else not to count on. Even in the best case scenario, an already thoroughly traumatized Sakura goes back to the Tosakas and Kariya probably drops dead shortly after. And that's the best case scenario. Kariya has already probably gone insane at this point, but considering the worms crawling around inside his body, I don't really blame him. Every time that he speaks of a happy future with him and Aoi and Rin and Sakura, it's so heartbreaking because even if you don't know how the war ends, it's so obvious that Kariya isn't going to succeed. And not only does he not succeed, but he also permanently handicaps the love of his life. Like, just the poor dude doesn't get anything. Assigning him with Berserker absolutely makes sense. And one of those subtle little details that you only notice after watching the show 3 times and spending countless hours thinking about it is how Kariya being in love with Aoi sort of parallels Lancelot being in love with Guinevere, with their affection for someone else's wife leaving them to misery. There's so many layers of brilliance in this story. I don't have much to say about Lancelot himself, because he mostly serves to help characterize Arturia, but there's so many great characters in this show that I honestly don't mind that much. My god, these characters are entertaining to watch. Kirei going from a man without purpose to realizing that he's a twisted psychopath, and Gilgamesh just being glorious and arrogant never gets boring. Also, just, man, some of their schemes are so perfectly twisted. Like, Tokiomi goes and proclaims Kirei Rin's godfather and gives him a ceremonial knife to symbolize his pride in him, and then Kirei immediately stabs him in the back with that knife and makes a contract with his servant over his dead body. And then after the Grail War is over, he does Tokiomi's funeral service and gives Rin the knife he stabbed her father with. Like, these guys are just sadistic, but it's so fun to watch. The same sort of principle applies to Castor and Ryunosuke as well. Like, obviously they're despicable, but my god are they entertaining villains. Gil also serves another role as a sort of in-universe observer, because he sees himself as a god above these mongrels, and the Grail War as a sort of mild entertainment, making him almost a part of the audience. Gil is the worst, but he's so fun to watch. Another big thing to note about the villains is that they're the ones who get out with a somewhat happy ending. Kira and Gil both survive the Grail War to make more trouble in Fate's Day Night, and while Castor and Yunosuke die, they die with a smile on their face, which is a lot more than can be said for all the other more well-intentioned characters in the show, crushed beneath the weight of their own ideals. But there is one more major exception to this. Waver and Ryder steal the show. Not only are their segments a vital change of pace from the rest of the story, they're also hilarious and incredibly endearing. Waver goes from a bratty, impatient kid to a young man ready for his own adventure, and that growth happens through Ryder. Their dynamic is one of the best things in the whole show, and it all pays off when they reach their final battle with Gilgamesh. Ryder telling Waver that above being his master, he is his friend, asking him to be his retainer before the final charge, Gilgamesh sparing Waver because of his loyalty to Iskander, just all of it. Every time that adult Waver shows up in other Fate shows, it just makes me feel so many feelings. And he also keeps the shirt too. I love Waver. He's such a good boy, and his relationship with Ryder has such a special place in my heart. Waver is the only one who not only survives the Grail War, but comes out of it changed for the better. And Ryder dies with the realization that the excitement of the journey itself, the beating of his own heart, was the waves of Okeanos. So then, what is it that separates them and the more malicious characters in the story from characters like Saber and Lancer and Kiritsugu, whose journeys end in such misery? It is not the presence of ideals. All the other characters have their own philosophies. But the characters who are driven to ruin by their ideals are the ones that never check them. They lean on their ideals, over-rely on them, and refuse to examine the problems in their outlook with a critical eye. It was too late for Saber. All the damage that her ideals had done happened long ago in the time of her legend. And throughout Zero, she remained stubborn in her faith in the way she lived her life and served as king. For Kiritsugu, his faith in the Grail is pretty much all he has. It's what he's living for. Irisfield even says that he would be unable to live with himself and commit suicide if he abandoned the Grail. And Lancer had so many opportunities to do something that might have prevented his terrible fate, but he remained steadfast in his chivalry only for that one-sided trust to come crashing down upon him. Even Kenneth's stupid elitism could be considered another example of an unquestioned philosophy having disastrous results. He thinks he's better than everyone because of his lineage, and then gets utterly destroyed by Kiritsugu. The evil characters, on the other hand, like Castor, Yunosuke, and Kirei, are completely aware of how sadistic they are. For better or worse, they're honest with themselves, and they didn't have all that much to lose, while the other characters had everything to gain. Gilgamesh is all self-important, but he doesn't lie to himself about anything. And Ryder says outright in the Banquet of Kings that a king should never regret anything, believing the journey to his goal, Okeanos, is more important than actually reaching it. Ryder in his philosophy is far from perfect. He's a tyrant, has a massive ego, and glorifies war, but it's nearly impossible not to get swept up in his charisma. And Kiritsugu's arc acts as a sort of indirect counter-argument to it. Really, the point that Fate Zero is making is about an unchecked reliance on ideals. You need to question yourself, to have big dreams but not be so dependent on them that to fail is to lose everything. It's about balance. A lot of the things I've discussed in this video are kind of going off the videos that Alexander has made about Fate Zero. Seriously, his analyses are amazing, and there are a lot of things that I hadn't even thought of before watching those videos. Please do yourself a favor and check them out. Fate Zero is such an incredibly constructed series. It's gripping and well-structured, and the characters and their beautiful, tragic arcs are a sight to behold. It's truly special to me, and I think about it all the time, even when I'm not watching the show. Also, every time I rewatch it, I notice something new. It's so packed to the brim that it takes multiple watches to soak everything in. On first watch, your brain is so occupied with keeping up with the actual events of the story that a lot of things go over your head. And when you know what's actually happening, you can focus on the characters and themes and foreshadowing. Not only is the show great, it's a gift that keeps on giving. I consider Fate Zero to be one of my favorite anime of all time, and I hope I was able to cast a bit of light onto why. Thank you so much for watching.